Anybody else?
Just to go back to the metadata issue again, you said you had to record some small amounts of metadata. Where does that requirement come from, and is it jurisdiction specific?
It is jurisdiction specific. We have servers currently in Germany and Luxembourg. Germany has a very strong Minister of Justice who is resisting a EU directive to implement retention for 6 months plus, and he has been resisting it for many years. So Germany does not have a data retention law, but it's still, you still need to log things for about a week. So that is one jurisdiction, but Luxembourg has implemented that EU directive, and they require you to log for 6 months. So it is really jurisdiction specific. It's not easy for the user to tell which jurisdiction his transfers fall under. And it might be multiple jurisdictions. It might be that the request is being processed by one server, but the actual file is coming from another server. And then which server's jurisdiction is actually authoritative in that context. So it's quite a difficult legal landscape.
Or would the requirement be in New Zealand?
That's a good question. We don't have any, well, we're now starting to, we are not yet serving New Zealand customers, but we're starting to build a node in New Zealand. And I think it's 6 months as well.
Yeah, it will be. It's interesting, the jurisdictional issue too, that it's one of the most interesting, from my perspective, legal issues, because it's very complex and it's not at all straightforward. And you can't really with any certainty say there will be no jurisdiction or there will be jurisdiction for anything, really.
Just the final part of that question, if the end user was anonymous, or given the metadata that you could record, like that user, just this user has accessed this service at this time, you would know nothing about the user, where they came from.
If the user, we can only record what we see and what the user provides. So it's up to the user, if they want total privacy, to use appropriate measures to protect his or her identity. We cannot tell if a user is coming from a residential IP address or from a 4-exit node that resides at the same IP address. That's impossible for us.
So, on the UI point a little bit, and on the concept of crypto for the masses, part of UI is always education. And I'd be curious how, or if you guys are approaching designing the experience of using Mega in a way that does educate normal users about what crypto is and why they want it.
The main part of Mega's design was to make sure that the user is not really aware of the encryption layer that's under the hood, in order not to make it overly complicated, also in order to deliver an experience that is in line with standard cloud storage. So we deliberately kept the cryptography that's happening from the user. The user doesn't realize that there is cryptography. But it would be interesting, I agree, to have maybe some animation on the site that shows how things work under the hood and to reassure the user that it is conceptually secure.
I have personally managed to use an XKCD to educate a great deal of people about improved password security. You probably know the one I mean. It's now been translated into a number of languages as well. So I do think, I do want to counter a little bit, like there's, I think, a developer's presumption that that you can't, this idea that if we teach people to use complex passwords, they'll lose their password, in part because we've been teaching them to use really stupid passwords. And I think there is a chance to say this is where, one of the things you end up saying in encrypted cloud storage is we can't get your data for you. And that's actually, I think, an opportunity for a teaching moment about what crypto is.
Yeah, true. That might actually be something that we should think about.
Dave Lane here, just had a quick question about some of the practical considerations. If you're minimizing the amount of logging that you're doing and the data that you retain and so on, does that create any headaches for you in terms of offering quality of service?
Not really. Quality of service is very much based on derived information. We don't need to log individual connections or have data to that level of granularity to optimize quality of service. That's more of a higher level of abstraction. We look at data that is a summary of a lot of individual connections.
Alec Wilson, we talked today a lot about the privacy of individual file uploads and downloads. We haven't talked a lot about privacy in relation to setting up an account and the method of payment for a paid account, that is probably a credit card. Surely that gives a lot of information about an individual or a company who has an account that may be more than enough for some nosy people to associate with file traffic.
Absolutely. Having a paid account gives, of course, away a lot of information if you use a credit card. And there are ways of paying anonymously. We don't support them directly, but we do support them through resellers. And there are scratch cards that you buy in stores. Bitcoin is anonymous under certain conditions, otherwise it's totally non-anonymous. And there are ways, we usually expect users not to have too much emphasis on the anonymity aspect, but we do think that some people who want to be anonymous in that context, they will know how to behave so that they remain anonymous. We don't we have no way of actively shielding ourselves from payment credentials or from IP addresses or from email addresses. That's just not something that we can do.
You made it fairly clear before that basically you have to have a secure endpoint, which most people don't have. So, I mean, is it possible to, I mean, that just strikes me that there's an implication from that, and that is that the spy services are saying that we shouldn't be using cryptography because it makes it impossible for them to do their jobs. In actual fact, if they wanted to try and enter your computer, there's a million different ways to get around there if they want to,
exactly.
Because you're using a whole lot of other pieces of software.
Right, well, what agencies would probably do first, rather than trying to break a 128-bit key, they would just enter your house and install little pieces of software on your computer. Or they would, when you perform a software update through a friendly, from a friendly, to them friendly source, they would make sure that this source piggybacks some code that they want onto that update. We have learned from a German case that an unprotected iTunes update was used by German investigators to get code on people's machines, not with cooperation from Apple, but just the fact that the initial request was not cryptographically checked. They retargeted that request to one of their own servers and successfully got to install audio device interception software to get around their trouble with listening into Skype. So that is a weakness that is very real, and there's no real way around that. Once your computer is compromised, it's compromised all the way, and no one has found a silver bullet to make sure that you keep your device secure, other than maybe booting from read-only media and rebooting frequently. And not executing any code before you do any cryptographic operation, any third-party code. So it restricts your use, your day-to-day use quite a bit if you want to make sure that no such things are happening to your computer.
Is there an easy way to find out whether your computer is compromised?
Well, you can find out whether one of the very widespread, well-known Trojans or spywares or viruses are on your computer by just running one of the many software tools that look for these, but they will not find a government-sponsored, dedicated, specific Trojan that was written just for you or for a small group of people.
Thanks, I feel much better now.
I don't.
Do we have any other questions or comments on cryptography in particular? Or any other more general privacy